Hello, and welcome to Spectral Searches. To further investigate the equipment being utilized for ghost hunting, I thought I would address another common device, the digital thermometer. Digital thermometers measure temperature and can be used to find fluctuations in temperature during paranormal investigations. One common fluctuation that is seen is a sudden drop in temperature, or cold spots, that may indicate that a spirit or ghost is present. The first documented correlation between cold spots and ghosts can be traced to the spiritual movement of the 19th century, where the sensation of coldness was considered one of the signs of a spirit's presence. As spiritualism became more formalized and paranormal investigations grew in popularity in the 20th century, the idea that cold spots were evidence of ghostly activity became more commonly documented. While cold spots and ghosts correlation is documented in the 19th century, documentation of coldness in ghosts can be traced back to the early folklore and superstitions. Coldness and the supernatural have appeared in various folklore and mythologies for centuries, although not always in the exact form of cold spots in the way that we think of them now. In many cultures, the coldness that accompanied a ghostly presence was often linked to the concept of a spiritual or otherworldly being coming from a different realm, or the notion that spirits could manifest by drawing energy from the environment, leaving behind a sensation of cold. However, these early descriptions were usually more vague, referring to general chill or eerie coldness when people experienced what they thought to be a haunting, rather than a specifically noted, localized cold spot in a room. The rise of spiritualism in the 19th century further established that correlation, though. The spiritualist movement that began in the mid-1800s in the United States and Europe was one of the earliest organized efforts to communicate with the dead. During this period, mediums and spiritualists claimed to be able to interact with spirits and often described cold sensations as signs that the spirit was present. Mediums and people involved in seances would often report a feeling of a sudden drop in temperature as evidence of a spiritual presence. These experiences were shared in both public and private seances. The idea of cold spots being directly linked to ghosts or spirits in the modern paranormal investigation sense became more formalized during the early 20th century with the development of ghost hunting techniques. Some of the first documented instances of cold spot phenomena as it relates to ghost encounters were likely reported by individuals involved in spiritualism and psychical research groups. There have been some notable historical accounts that have helped to further strengthen that association between cold spots and spiritual presence. This includes the Fox sisters and the Borley Rectory. The Fox sisters were central figures in the birth of the spiritualist movement in the U.S., and reported phenomena that included strange sounds, cold sensations, and physical manifestations that they attributed to spirits. Though they didn't specifically describe cold spots in the modern sense, their early work helps cement the connection between temperature and the spiritual phenomena. Additionally, the infamous Borley Rectory, often called the most haunted house in England, became a focal point for paranormal research. Over the years, investigators reported experiencing cold spots, especially in areas of the house that were associated with ghostly activity, like the so-called Nun's Walk. Investigations of the Borley Rectory helped bring the idea of cold spots and ghosts to a wider attention in paranormal literature. So if digital thermometers are used to find cold spots, and digital thermometers measure temperature, what is temperature really? Temperature refers to the measure of the average kinetic energy of the particles, such as atoms or molecules, that make up a substance. In simpler terms, it tells us how hot or cold something is based on the motion of its particles. Higher temperatures have particles that are moving faster, indicating more energy, and lower temperatures have particles that are moving slowly, indicating less energy. Temperature is a fundamental concept in thermodynamics, the study of heat and energy transfer. The common units of temperature include Celsius, Fahrenheit, or Kelvin. The standard unit in science is Kelvin, where 0 Kelvin, or absolute zero, represents the point at which molecular motion stops. So if temperature is a measure of heat or relates to heat, then what is it that is actually measuring? Temperature doesn't directly measure the amount of heat an object contains. Rather, it measures how much thermal energy is present in a system. When two objects at different temperatures come into contact, heat flows from the hotter object to the colder one until they reach a thermal equilibrium, i.e., they are the same temperature. Heat refers to the transfer of thermal energy between systems or objects due to a difference in temperature. Heat always flows from the hotter object to the cooler one until the thermal equilibrium is reached, meaning both objects are at the same temperature. In physics, heat is considered a form of energy that flows as a result of a temperature difference. Unlike temperature, which measures the average kinetic energy of particles in the substance, heat refers specifically to the energy being transferred as a result of that difference. Heat energy can be transferred in three primary ways. Conduction, which is the transfer of heat through direct contact, for example, when a metal spoon is placed in a hot cup of coffee. Convection, which is the transfer of heat through movement of fluids, like liquids or gases. For example, warm air rising and cool air sinking in a room is an example of convection. And radiation, the transfer of heat through electromagnetic waves, like infrared radiation, without needing a medium. For example, the heat from the sun reaches Earth via radiation. Heat is energy in transit. It moves from a higher energy state, the hotter object, to a lower energy state, the cooler object. The total amount of heat energy depends on factors like the mass of the object, its specific heat capacity, and the temperature change. So what is the difference, simply put, between heat versus temperature? Heat is energy that flows between systems due to a temperature difference. Temperature is a measure of the average kinetic energy of particles in a substance. An important thing to note that has been mentioned here, but more simply put, is that our casual language typically fails to capture that only heat moves. Cold does not move. When it's a summer day and you leave a window open, you're not letting the cold air out, you're letting the heat in. When it's winter and you feel a change in temperature near the window, it's not cold getting in, it's the heat dissipating or leaving at the window. So now that we understand the relationship between temperature and heat, what does it mean scientifically when there's a rapid decrease in temperature? A sudden drop in temperature from an energy perspective means that thermal energy, the total internal energy of its substance due to the random motion of its particles, is being rapidly lost or transferred away from the system. Temperature is directly related to the average kinetic energy of particles. So when the temperature drops, the particles in the system move slower and have less energy. Here's what happens at a deeper level. For a decrease in kinetic energy, the temperature is a measure of the average kinetic energy of the particles in the substance. When the temperature drops, the particles lose some of that energy, moving more slowly and having less random motion. A drop in temperature corresponds to a loss of thermal energy from the system. This energy could have been transferred away to another system or lost due to processes like heat radiation, conduction, or convection. For the energy transfer or heat loss, a sudden temperature drop generally indicates that heat has been transferred out of the system to a cooler surrounding. For example, if you put a hot object in a cold environment, heat will flow from the object to the cooler surroundings, leading to a decrease in object temperature. If an object is in contact with a much colder environment or a substance, thermal energy will flow out rapidly, causing the object's temperature to drop. In some cases, a sudden drop in temperature can cause a phase change in materials. For example, water freezing, condensation, or sublimation. At a thermodynamic standpoint, a sudden drop in temperature could indicate the system is undergoing a rapid cooling process, or entropy, the measure of disorder or randomness in the system, might increase due to the energy spreading out more widely, such as heat flowing out of the system. If the temperature drops due to radiative cooling, the system is losing energy as thermal radiation, such as infrared radiation, into the surroundings. And if the cooling occurs due to a phase change, such as liquid changing to a solid, the system may release or absorb latent heat, affecting the overall energy dynamics. So how do digital thermometers work if they're measuring all these things? In essence, a digital thermometer works by converting a temperature measurement into an electrical signal, processing that signal through a microprocessor, or ADC, and then displaying the temperature as a digital readout. Digital thermometers generally rely on temperature sensors to detect the temperature and then send a corresponding electrical signal. The most common types of sensors used in digital thermometers for low temperature monitoring are thermistors. Thermistors are resistors that change their resistance with temperature. They are made from ceramic materials, and the resistance of the thermistor decreases or increases as the temperature rises or falls. The sensor, such as a thermistor, generates an electrical signal based on its resistance. The signal represents the temperature of the measured object. The resistance value is sent to a microprocessor or other control circuitry inside the thermometer. Once the sensor produces the electrical signal, it is sent to a microcontroller or analog to digital converter, which is the ADC, within the thermometer. This component will amplify the signal, convert the signal to a digital value, and then into a temperature reading. Once that value is calculated, it is displayed on the digital screen to be read by the user. So how does this tie into paranormal investigations? In the context of paranormal investigations, the theory is often present that a spirit or ghost can cause cold spots, or a sudden drop in temperature, as indicated by their presence. The belief in this connection can be tied to various cultural, historical, and anecdotal accounts, but it's important to know that this is based on subjective experiences, not scientific proof. The logic presented in these paranormal circles are the following. Firstly, energy manipulation. The theory is that the spirits or paranormal entities could be drawing energy from the environment, which results in the sudden loss of thermal energy in the area where the spirit is present. Some paranormal investigators suggest that the act of a spirit manifesting or making its presence known requires energy, and this energy may be drawn from the surrounding air, causing the temperature drop. Secondly, cold spots as a manifestation. In many ghost stories and paranormal investigations, cold spots are thought to be areas where spirit is trying to manifest or is interacting with the physical world. These cold spots are often described as feeling much colder than the surrounding areas for no apparent reason. This correlation with temperature drops might suggest the idea that the spirit is somehow interacting with the physical world by causing these shifts in thermal energy. And lastly, electromagnetic and environmental factors. Some paranormal theories claim that spirits or energy forms may interact with electromagnetic fields or other environmental factors, potentially influencing the temperature. These claims, however, are often speculative and lack scientific evidence. Spectral searches utilizes monitoring of temperature to look for cold spots through the use of the Nithing digital thermometer with maximum and minimum temperature memory. The process is outlined as follows for the digital thermometer. Operation of the Nithing digital thermometer. Open the back battery holder of the thermometer and insert the appropriate new battery. This will turn on the thermometer. Ensure the probe is attached if required to measure the temperature of specific locations. Document the initial temperature on the periodic recordings checklist. Continue to monitor the temperature throughout the investigation, keeping close attention to any rises or falls in temperature. Always be sure to account for environmental factors such as proximity of investigators to the thermometer, decreases in temperature due to natural decreases from day to night, or changes such as air conditioners or fans. Communication through the Nithing digital thermometer. The Nithing digital thermometer is typically used to determine the presence of an entity and not as a means of communication. However, if intelligent communication does occur through rises and falls in temperature, perform the investigation as described. Utilize the rise and fall of temperatures to confirm the presence of the entity through consistent and intelligent responses. Determine yes or no responses by the rise or fall of the device. Most documented cases of spiritual or paranormal encounters attribute cold feelings to the presence of spirits. Therefore, ask the spirit to approach the thermometer for yes would be confirmed by a decrease in temperature. Do not limit the investigation to common attributions. but enter the communication with the knowledge of past experiences. Ask simple yes or no questions and attempt to use other means of communication such as the digital recorder for EVP or the K2 EMF reader to further substantiate the communication. Chills, eerie cold areas, drafts, and cold spots have been documented in relation to spirits and ghosts for centuries. From folklore all the way through to modern day, there is an association between the cold and spirits. Whether it is the spirit simply drawing energy from the surroundings, or a more elaborate system with spirits manipulating electromagnetic waves, it is a measurement that deserves to be monitored. So in order to keep our net of evidence as wide as possible, we will continue to utilize temperature recordings in our spectral searches.